The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, December 5th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Professor of Middle Eastern Studies in the History Department at the University of Michigan, Juan Cole, on his book, Muhammad, Prophet of Peace and the Clash, Amidst the Clash of Empires. Also on the program today, it is a day of national mourning when we recall the suffering of those killed and injured in the first Iraq War and throughout Central America as former CIA chief and president George Herbert Walker Bush is finally laid to rest. Meanwhile, Michael Flynn has sung, and apparently it was an incredibly long and beautiful tune about 3 different investigations over the course of 19 recitals. The Trump administration wants to eliminate the U.S. Postal Service workers' rights to negotiate for their pay. Wisconsin Republicans passed a host of undemocratic laws in the middle of the night. And the Weekly Standard is on its last legs as conservatism looks into the mirror and sees Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Trump's EPA to roll back limits on coal plants. And the Senate is now firmly turning on Mohammed bin Salman after a PowerPoint by the CIA. National Republican Congressional Committee emails were hacked, unreleased. The Republican sadly wins the Secretary of State race in Georgia. Jeffrey Epstein, convicted sex offender, settles a suit, but more coming. And AOC looking to get on the Ways and Means Committee in the House. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Wednesday, it is, I guess, a national holiday of sorts. Federal offices are closed. The stock exchange is closed. I think they're probably happy about that. Yesterday, I think it took a big tumble. I only am aware of that peripherally, as I am not heavily invested in the stock market.
Just a couple of oil companies.
Just a couple of oil companies, big tobacco.
Yep.
Weapons manufacturers.
Yeah, Lockheed just had a huge merger approved.
Yes, I'm very excited about that.
CEW,
and
Tobacco Energy Weapons.
There you go.
Safe portfolio.
That's my portfolio, of course. Heavily invested in those sectors, but most of that is just actually delivered in cash bags, slush fund. Yeah. So, but today is a day of mourning for George Herbert Walker Bush. Like I said yesterday, perhaps one of the more overrated presidents that we had. This is a guy who pardoned 3, 4, maybe more people involved in the Iran-Contra scandal to probably protect his own culpability. He waged a war against Saddam Hussein after basically either purposely or mistakenly opening the door to Saddam Hussein's attack on Kuwait. He encouraged the Shia in Iraq to rise up and then did not offer them any support, therefore leading to mass slaughter. He also, of course, was instrumental in bringing some of those Phoenix program folks from Vietnam over into Central America as the CIA chief, and the implications of which we see reverberate to this day in terms of the massive violence and breakdown in societal structures in many countries in Central America. I mean, it's not inconceivable that he was one of the midwives of the crack epidemic we had back in the 80s, as the CIA was using cocaine as a means in which to finance some of their illicit activities. I mean, there's a whole host of issues as to why we should remember this man on this day.
Yeah, but he was polite to other politicians, so he was better than Trump.
He was incredibly polite and very patrician, and also extremely, extremely wealthy, which, of course, is, well, not that rare for a president. But here we have Donald Trump, very appropriately, heading to the funeral today. Let's take a look at the video. This is the video of Donald Trump heading to the by motorcade to the Blair House, the presidential guest house across Pennsylvania Avenue, to visit with the family of the late President George Herbert Walker Bush. Let's play the video because it lasts only seconds, because he gets into a motorcade. Yeah, can we expand that? Let's take a look at this video. Here it is. There he goes. And it's quite a motorcade. And then they stop right there. That's nice, easy means in which to shoot that, because you just have to pivot your body about 15 degrees to capture. It was about here. Let's take a look at the map. This is about. Let's say they say okay. Now, according to Google Maps, from the White House to the Blair House is approximately a 2-minute walk.
Walking sucks.
Yeah,
Overrated.
it's actually a 9-minute car ride. But it is a 2-minute walk.
I have to conserve my energy.
But I don't know that Donald Trump has walked for 2 minutes straight.
He might have a walking phobia.
It's possible.
He's afraid of stairs.
Too many curbs. Too many
There could be
curbs. Can't do it.
Think about it.
How long till he gets one of those motorized scooters for places that cars can't go?
I would not be surprised if that comes out in some White House memoir, that's what he's been using inside the White House.
Maybe like those motorized stair climbers for the elderly,
But
little chairs.
Indeed. And as George Herbert Walker Bush was an oil man, I guess he would appreciate the probably gallons of gas that were used in the multiple
Burning some
vehicles.
Fuel, opening up some markets.
There you go.
Appreciate what you did.
That's not to mention he replaced Thurgood Marshall. Do you know that with
Yes. With I don't know who you replaced him with, but I know
with
that he got,
what's his face?
That creep.
Thomas. Oh,
Yep.
Right. I found one.
Hey, exactly. He got it. Folks, one of today's sponsors is Skillshare. And the first 500 people who go to skl.sh/majority, that's skl.sh/majority, and you guys got to wait at least until like this afternoon, because you're going to get 2 whole months of totally free access to Skillshare's entire library of super quality online courses and tutorials. Skillshare is a vibrant online learning community. It offers courses on everything from design to video editing, photography, business, technology, cooking, mediation, everything in between. There are Skillshare courses for everyone. You'll have no problem finding courses that's going to be useful for you both in your personal and professional life. I am a perfect example of that. Let me read this and I'll just tell you in a second. Whether you want to sharpen your skills with something you already love doing or you want to learn how to do something totally new, Skillshare has you covered. They got courses for entrepreneurs on computer coding, web development, personal nutrition, learning new languages, brushing up on your Spanish, Photoshop, you name it. For instance, I don't know why I did this. I don't cut that much stuff, but I was sort of just interested in it. I watched this like mini class on knife skills, like on how to chop like a chef. And I also took one on Google Analytics because I thought like I should understand that stuff. And I know it a little better, but I'm glad I'm not going to take another one. I just don't. That's too dry for me. But both were incredibly informative. And I'm going to be taking more, frankly. There's one on just brewing an amazing cup of coffee. But there's also stuff like accounting. You can take accounting classes. You can learn all accounting skills in 1 hour. I think that's actually one I'm going to just set up to do because I need to do that. But you can get 2 entire months of free access to every single course offered by Skillshare by going to skl.sh/majority. That's skl.sh/majority. Just think of everything you'll have at your fingertips for 2 whole months. skl.sh/majority. I put a link in our podcast description and, of course, under our YouTube at the moment. So check that out. Also, remember, this holiday season is a great time for a bedding upgrade for you or, frankly, for somebody else. I've sent Brooklinen sheets to my sister as a gift last year. Maybe I'll do the other sister this year. She's probably listening. I just blew it. Brooklinen works directly with manufacturers and customers. They're able to offer a 5-star hotel quality sheets that are affordable and easy to order. Plus, they have over 20 colors and patterns. These sheets don't just feel amazing, they look great too. And they're super fast shipping. Make sure you get them for holiday gifts and you get it on time. I have 3-4 different sets of Brooklinen sheets now. I keep ordering more. I'm now getting a little bit fanatical about getting more pillowcases because I'm trying to mix and match striped and solids with the pillowcases. I'm getting very excited about that. You get there's 3 different versions of the sheets. Personally, I go for the cool, crisp cotton ones, but they have like the smoother ones. I don't like those. I like the cool, crisp sleep. But my Brooklinen sheets are the best. They're the most comfortable sheets I've ever slept on. And now it's time for your upgrade. Brooklinen.com has an exclusive offer for just Majority Report listeners. You get $20 off and free shipping when you use the promo code MAJORITY at Brooklinen.com. Brooklinen is so confident in their product that all their sheets, comforters, and towels come with a lifetime warranty. The only way to get $20 off and free shipping is to use the promo code MAJORITY at Brooklinen.com. That's Brooklinen, BROOKLINEN.com, promo code MAJORITY. Brooklinen, these really are the best sheets ever. And lastly, this is super cool. Our last sponsor of the day is Privacy.com. And you can check them out at privacy.com/majority. It is a totally free service. Go to privacy.com/majority. That lets you buy anything online without having to give your credit card number and lets you prevent companies from overcharging you. Anybody in the office yesterday will know that that was a problem for me just as of yesterday. Here's how it works. You take a couple of minutes, you link your bank account to privacy.com. Then you're able to create virtual credit card numbers, which are linked to your bank account. You can create as many virtual cards as you want. You can delete them. You can freeze them and unfreeze them. You can set limits on each card. It's basically like a cloaking device for your credit card. It's great for signing up for free trials because you can just create a virtual card once and delete it, knowing that you'll never be charged once the trial is over. Think about it. How many times have you gone to do those free trials? You got to put your credit card in. And you're like, I'm not going to do it because I'll forget and they'll charge me. It also protects you when companies get hacked and people's information is stolen because you're not giving out your real credit card number. Each card is locked to a merchant, so you're totally protected against fraud and unauthorized use of your card. Privacy.com's mobile app and desktop browser extension make it incredibly easy for you to manage your wallet of virtual cards and allow you to autofill your virtual card number at the click of a button when you're shopping online. There are countless different advantages to using a service like this to pay your bills and buy things online. You can find out more and get 100% free and unlimited access by going to privacy.com/majority. Again, we have links in our podcast description and in our YouTube page. Check it out, privacy.com/majority. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to the great Juan Cole about his new book, Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amid the Clash of Empires. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Professor of Middle Eastern Studies in the History Department at the University of Michigan and author of his latest, Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amid the Clash of Empires. Professor Juan Cole, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much, Sam.
So let's start. This is. I want to resist the temptation of sort of applying what you have researched about Muhammad and Islam to today's sort of political scene, but I want to hold off on that because I know this is a book that it's a history book. But let's just talk about the era in which Muhammad arises and the sort of the geopolitical context in which he begins the Muslim religion.
There was something that I call a world war going on, raging all around him and his people there in Western Arabia, between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire in Iran. It began in 603 when Iran invaded the Eastern Roman Empire. And, the Roman Empire at one point had the entire Mediterranean, but it had lost the West and funnily enough, Rome, and moved to Constantinople, what is now Istanbul, in the East. But it ruled. It had ruled Syria and what is now Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Egypt. And the Iranians took the Middle Eastern part of the Roman Empire away in that period after 603. And that was what was going on during the time that the Prophet Muhammad began preaching.
And so, so give us a sense of, to the extent that I can understand and conceptualize these things, it's from having studied, I guess, what would be considered antiquity, or somewhere between late antiquity, around Yavna, and it's sort of the birth of sort of what we consider more modern Judaism today. Rabbinic Judaism, and,
right.
and there was so many different sort of competing forces at that time. What were the competing forces that a prophet at that time would have found him or herself, I guess, surrounded by?
Sure. Well, culturally and religiously, the dominant force in the Roman Empire was Christianity. But it had a big schism, a big division between the imperial faith, which was favored in Constantinople in the late 500s and early 600s, which was called the Chalcedonian branch of the religion after a conference that was held. And then locally you had what are called Miaphysites, or sometimes they're called Monophysites. And these two sort of branches of Christianity had severe how to define Jesus, his divinity, his relationship to God the Father, and so forth. And so they fought over this. And most people in Syria and Egypt favored the Miaphysite definition, whereas the imperial authorities favored the Chalcedonian. So the Christians were deeply divided, and the imperial faith had difficulty asserting itself in the Near East. And then on the Iranian side, the great religion of the time was the Zoroastrian faith, which is now a very small group of people, mainly in Bombay, in India. But at that time, it was a world religion and very influential, and believed in a prophet and a supreme deity and a kind of moral and ethical struggle against the forces of darkness. And then, as you say, there was a big Jewish community, not only in what is now Palestine and Israel, where there was a very large community still in the Galilee and Tiberias. They weren't allowed inside Jerusalem, by the way, by the Roman Christians. And then there was also a big Jewish community in Yemen, which had actually come to power briefly in the early 500s, and then was dethroned by Christians, and there was wrangling between Christians and Jews in Yemen. And so the Prophet Muhammad lived in this multicultural world where there were various kinds of Christians, there were Jews, there were Zoroastrians, and they mostly didn't think well of one another. The two branches of Christianity called each other heretics and doomed each other to hell, and the Zoroastrians thought non-Iranians were barbarians, and so on and so forth. And my argument is that the Prophet Muhammad tried to create more of an ecumenical cultural stream there in that world.
And okay, yeah. So let's talk about the Prophet Muhammad as a prophet of peace. I mean, what does that mean exactly?
Well, there are many dimensions to his peace work. The first thing to say is that his career fell into two broad eras. One was when he began preaching in his hometown of Mecca in Western Arabia. And much of the Quran and the more shorter and medium chapters are from that time, and then a later period when he and his followers were forced by persecution to emigrate to nearby Medina, and the emphases in the Quran in those two eras are very different. But in the Mecca period, where they were simply being harassed and taunted by the Meccan power elite, which was still pagan. Most people in that world had either become Christian or Zoroastrian or Jews, but there were still some people who followed the old religion and the old gods of the Arabs, or even the Olympian pantheon. People still worship Zeus and Athena and so forth. And the Arabs probably mixed the Greek and the Arab deities together. Polytheism is very hybrid. But they were very attached still in Mecca, according to the Quran, to their gods and goddesses. And the Prophet preached monotheism, so his early community received a lot of harassment. The Quran consistently throughout this period advises people to deal with harassment by what we would think of as turning the other cheek. It says, repel evil with good, return taunting and harassment with wishes of peace, and say peace to those who are harassing you. And there's something very Sermon on the Mount-like about many of these verses in the Mecca period. Moreover, there's a kind of insistence on religious tolerance. So the Quran says to the pagans, you have your religion and we have ours, and it seems to imply that they should try to get along regardless of theological differences. The Quran in this period praises Jews as the chosen people, says that there are people among the Jews who are exemplars, teaching us all how to be better human beings. It praises the Christians for their own sense of charity, of giving to the poor, of turning the other cheek when faced with harassment. So it's a very copacetic atmosphere that the Quran seems to present there in that period, although it is admitting that there are these moments of harassment and taunting. They don't seem to rise to the level of violence, and that's different in the succeeding Medina period.
All right, I want to move to that Medina period in a moment, and just and get a sense of just how long, I guess, a period of time the Quran was essentially work in progress. But to what extent is Islam at that point seen as a culmination of Judaism and Christianity, as part of a lineage, as opposed to sort of like a rival?
Right. Well, it's been argued by Fred Donner at the University of Chicago that when Islam began there in Mecca, that it really was an ecumenical movement, and that people gathered around the leadership, the spiritual leadership of Muhammad, regardless of their religion, and that they could kind of be his followers and think well of his teachings and yet remain in their religion. And so that early Islam was kind of a United Nations of religions. And that's very plausible from what the Quran says, because it does praise these members of the other communities. And there's a document that survives when Muhammad goes to Medina, which explicitly says that the Muslims and the Jews are one nation, and then it says the Muslims have their religion and the Jews have theirs. So it's possible to be part of this community or nation and yet retain a different faith.
And that's is that the Constitution of Medina?
Yes, that's the Constitution of Medina.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, what are the implications of that? I guess that's part of the peace, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, diplomacy going on here.
That's right. Well, from 610 to 622, the Prophet was preaching in Mecca, and then 622, the date of the emigration, they moved under pressure to Medina. And Medina was, from what the Quran says, a much more complex society, a bigger city, and a more diverse one than had been Mecca. And there was a substantial Jewish community there, which the Prophet reached out to and tried to make an alliance with them and with the tribes in Medina, some of them probably still pagans. So he put together this coalition, and it was designed to protect Medina because it was clear that the Meccan pagans were angry and were going to come after them there, that Medina would be attacked. And so I think the Treaty of Medina, or the Constitution of Medina, was intended to bind together the major populations in the city in a defensive pact. But it does explicitly give freedom of conscience to the Jewish inhabitants and makes them treaty partners with the believers.
So let's talk just briefly about the development of the Quran. How long is this sort of a work in progress? And then I want to just sort of like slowly get into this concept of abrogation.
Yes. Well, the prophet, heard these words in his mind. The Quran talks about it as coming unbidden into his mind between 610 and 632. It was a couple decades and a half of in progress, and the character of the book changes a bit over time. The beginning chapters are short and kind of staccato, and then the middle chapters are more like the Psalms, very sonorous and praises of God and so forth. And then the later chapters are more like Deuteronomy as they start talking about law and how to organize the society and so forth.
And okay, so I mean, was it just developing in his mind, or was he writing it down and sort of like serializing it? Like, what was the actual mechanics of this?
Well, we don't know the answer to that question for sure. With the Quran, as I said, the prophet felt it as something coming to him externally. It wasn't like he sat down and wrote a book. It was more like inspiration. And then he would recite it to his followers. And the Muslim sources say that there were people who then memorized it, and other sources say that some people wrote it down, and made inscriptions on camel bone shoulder blades and so forth. But we're now finding really early manuscripts, and there's one dated as early as 645. The prophet died in 632. So it's entirely possible that there were Quran manuscripts on papyrus or parchment during the prophet's lifetime. The later sources just are murky and contradictory on how exactly all this happened.
And who would have written it down? I guess there. We have a sense that at least parts of the Christian Bible, right, were written by apostles and some, apostles of apostles. I guess. I mean, who would have written it down at that time? A similar dynamic, or?
Actually, I would argue it's a different dynamic because in Christianity.
Oh, I'm sorry, Professor. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We just had a little bit. Our Skype is acting a little bit funky. Just, I'm sorry. You were about to say it's a different dynamic than in Christianity.
Yeah, I think the Bible and the Quran or the New Testament and the Quran have a different kind of text history because. We think that the Gospels developed in Christian communities, and they were stories that those particular cities or communities told about Jesus, and they developed over time and ultimately got written down. Whereas it seems increasingly clear that the Quran is more like the letters of Paul, they came through a particular person and in a particular era, and so they're not the work of a community. And some early sources say that there were scribes around the Prophet Muhammad, the writers of the Revelation, who took down the Quran. And others suggest that they just, they had very powerful memories, being tribal people, and they memorized large amounts of epic poetry, so that they just memorized the Quran, and then a subsequent generation wrote it down. So, as I said, this question you're asking is a really good one, and scholars puzzle over it, but it's also not been fully decided. And as I said, we're now starting to get some some manuscript evidence for how these things happened, which seems to contradict some of the stories that were told in later generations.
What of the legend, I guess, or the narrative of Muhammad being illiterate? Does that track with what you've found or theorize?
Oh no, I think it's very clear that Muhammad was not illiterate. First of all, he is said both by the early Muslim and the early Christian sources to have been a long-distance merchant. Long-distance merchants are always literate. How would you keep your books? And then the Quran as a document is just enormously learned and humane and broad, and it quotes the Palestinian Talmud. It has Aramaic words in it. It occasionally quotes the Bible. It retells in Judaism you have this tradition of the rabbis retelling the biblical stories with a particular moral point. It's called a midrash, and there are things like that in the Quran. So Muhammad was clearly a man who was, it seems to me, widely traveled, widely read. I suspect he was trilingual in Arabic, Aramaic, and Greek. And I think it does a disservice to him to suggest that he was illiterate. And I think that one of the reasons that the Muslim tradition sometimes asserts this is that they wanted to protect him from charges that he was a plagiarist, that he just picked these things up and reworked them from other people. But that kind of polemical charge is anyway silly, because that was his heritage. He was a man of the Near East, and of course he would, in communicating to his audiences who knew these biblical or other stories, he would retell them with a moral point. And the Bible does the same thing. Some of what Jesus said is a retelling of Isaiah with a moral point. So I don't think it's necessary to have that point of view of Muhammad being illiterate in order to protect him from influences.
I mean, how do we know that all of that is a reflection of him as opposed to the crew around him that first transcribed stuff? Our first transcription manuscript, and maybe that window starts to close a little bit, but it's 10 years, a little bit more after he passes. How do we know he didn't just have sort of lieutenants around who were like, we're going to definitely make this guy seem a little bit more sophisticated?
Well, that's a really good question, Sam. And you're managing to, through your questions, to raise these issues that have really dominated the study of early Islam for the last 40 years. There's a whole school called the Revisionists who took the position that you just elaborated, which was that maybe the Quran is more like the Gospels, and that it grew up over time and was added to and that reworked and maybe represents in some verses, more the atmosphere of the later Muslim empire in Damascus or Baghdad. And that revisionist school, however, I think has been pretty firmly refuted by now, for the most part. First of all, the Quran doesn't contain any evidence of any incident that happened after the Prophet Muhammad. So just to give one example, I read the Quran as being extremely pro-Roman. It predicts that the Romans, although they have been temporarily defeated, will come back. And it talks about how the closest in love to the Muslims are the Christians. It talks about the need to protect churches from being raided and destroyed. So I see the book throughout, even into the what we think of are the later chapters, as pro-Christian, pro-Roman. And we know that soon after the Prophet's death, however, the early Muslim polity based in Medina came into conflict with the Romans. So if some of the Quran were reworked after the Prophet's death, it surely would reflect that new situation of conflict with the Romans, and it doesn't. And whereas the later Muslim sources do. So there are many reasons for thinking that this document is 610, 632, and that it probably is, something that came through the Prophet Muhammad himself.
So, okay, so great. All right, but let's talk about that concept of abrogation now. What does that mean, and what is it in practice?
Right. Well, it began as a way of dealing with the fact that the Quran did, develop over time. Just to give you one example, there's an early verse that says, "Don't come to prayers drunk." That seems to indicate that people were drinking alcohol, and sometimes they went a little too far. And that's disapproved of if you come to prayers drunk. But then there's a later verse that says, well, in alcohol and gambling, there's good and bad. The bad outweighs the good towards disapproval. And then ultimately it says, don't drink. And so the people who were dealing with the Quran as a source of law, and by the way, there isn't very much law in the Quran, but who were interested in this issue of Quranic law, wanted to be careful, where you took the law from should be the most advanced position the Quran had. It shouldn't be an earlier position that later was changed. And likewise with the point of prayer, Muslims pray towards a particular point just as Jews do. And initially the Muslims prayed towards Jerusalem just as Jews do. But then around 624, the Quran instructs them to start praying towards Mecca instead. So, if you were setting the point of prayer, you can't use the early verses, which seem to point towards Jerusalem. So there's abrogation in that sense, but it was initially always about, and the great jurists say it's only about law, and there isn't very much law in the Quran. Later on, medieval Muslims started using it, I think, to shape their reception of the Quran in the ways that they wanted. So as you had the Crusades or very military kind of movements, they started saying, well, all those peace verses I was talking about have been abrogated by the verses that talk about war, which a lot of the jurists thought was, completely irresponsible and unacceptable. But there were people who did that. And so, it was a way for the government or jurists to take control of the Quran instead of having it dictate their values. They could decide which parts of it they liked.
All right. I mean, this is, that dynamic is, I think, hugely important. And it's obviously, that dynamic is not exclusive to the Quran. Right. We see it in the context of the U.S. Constitution on some level as well, considering the amount of time that we've had to sort of reinterpret the Constitution. We see the Supreme Court do it all the time. So that concept is not unique. And on some level, it's that dynamic which we see, which takes us sort of like into the political realm of today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, the extremist groups disregard all of the commands in the Quran to make nice with other religions, to protect churches and synagogues, to reach out and be charitable towards other people, and then to wish peace upon your enemies. They disregard all those things because in the Medina period, when Medina was under attack from the militant pagans who came out with brigades and swords and spears, and they were going to kill the Muslims, the Quran then does permit defensive war. Always defensive war, never offensive, but it does allow and indeed commands defensive war. And the verses where it says, establish lookouts for the approach of the enemy, and then when you encounter them on the battlefield, meet them with deadly force. Those kinds of verses, which are about those defensive encounters, then are misinterpreted by the extremists and also by people who hate Islam, by the way, as being somehow universal commandments, as having no context, and as outweighing all of the peace verses.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. I also have to say, in my for my own self-esteem, that I was very disciplined in not making this entire interview about your piece entitled "On How Everything Sam Harris Says About Islam Is Wrong." But let's talk about let's talk about the sort of the modern day Islamophobia that we see, and the dynamic of I guess how there is this sort of like this abrogation that goes on, but also B, there is a sort of lack of historical context in which people are assessing what certain Muslim people do without a historical context in which that vision of Islam is being used. I mean, can you maybe expand on what I've said and make it a little more clear, I guess, for folks?
Well, you've made it very clear. The fact is that first of all, often the Quran is not very well translated, and people then don't know anything about its context. At one point Jesus says, "I haven't come to bring peace, I've come to bring a sword." And if people who didn't like Christianity could quote that and say, "Look, those Christians are about murdering people." That's the kind of thing that people do to the Quran and to Muslims. So the Quran talks about the pagan, militant pagans who were trying to kill the Muslims as infidels. It never uses that word as a noun for Jews or Christians. And then it says that when those pagans come for you, defend yourself with lethal force if you have to. So then people will read that, and it says, slay the infidels. So then they allege that the Muslims want to go around just killing random people, which is, completely ahistorical and not what the Quran or the Muslim community believes at all. People like Sam Harris, who've made careers out of spreading hate against Muslims, have excerpted poorly translated versions of those verses and tried to make them mean something that they don't.
And one of the things that I think Sam Harris also likes to quote and to in his argument that there's something fundamentally wrong with Islam is the Hadith. What is the Hadith? What is the relationship of the Hadith to the Quran, and what of that practice of someone like Sam Harris's?
Yes, well, that's a complicated issue because mainstream Sunni Islam is a little bit like Orthodox Judaism in the sense that you have the Bible and then you have the Talmud, and both are adhered to as strictly as possible. And so with the Muslims, there's a big amount of material that grew up after the Prophet's death, which is sayings and doings which are attributed to him by later generations. Those were collected, and people tried to winnow through them and decide which ones were sound. But there's a vast amount of material of that sort. In my view, as a Western academic, it's clearly contradictory to the Quran itself. But there are, thousands of these sayings and doings attributed to the Prophet and his companions, which some of them can be picked out and used for polemical purposes.
I mean, that is the point, right? I mean, and that's what we talk about historical context, is that throughout the past 1,500 some odd years, different political entities have wanted to gain the authority of Islam as a mechanism in which to rule or to shape the politics of their day. And so they reinterpret the religion or the document in ways that suit that political agenda.
That's right. And of course, this is a universal phenomenon.
Right. I mean, this is like the kings saying, this is like the king, of England saying, like, I'm here because God wanted me to be.
Exactly. Or Pope Urban II, who strongly believed that Christians were commanded by the New Testament to go to the Holy Land and slit the throats of the Jews and the Muslims. Religion can be used for these political purposes. And then the whole tradition of the religion can be deployed in various ways. So, again, in the history of the Holy Roman Empire, after the Roman Empire became Christian, Christianity was the state religion, and gradually no other religion was allowed. And the interpretation of the New Testament by the Byzantine kings was that, pagans should be killed. They threw them to the lions. They kind of reversed what had happened to them earlier on. To make this about Christianity as opposed to Byzantine policy would be invidious. It would be unfair, and likewise, a lot of the polemic against Islam is about what Muslims have done in history, which has been both good and bad, as they're human beings.
I mean, ultimately, and lastly, I mean, that obviously, as a historian, this is your field of interest. But when you set to embark on a project like this, what both from an academic and I guess more from a human perspective do you hope to achieve?
Well, I began this project with an open mind, and I had been trained in my youth in Islamics, and had wanted to go back to it for some time. And the post 9/11 atmosphere was such that at my blog I would get involved in conversations with my readers about the Quran and about Islam, and I began to see that it just wasn't well understood. It wasn't understood as I understood it, but then I also had some puzzles to work through in the text and in the history. So some years ago, I began working on this in what passes for my spare time, and I tried to read as much as I could about the late Roman context of all of these things, and then to trace through these themes in the Quran. And often I was surprised. I was surprised by how much emphasis there was on peacemaking in the Quran, and how few, verses there are. It's said that the Prophet Muhammad was involved in these defensive wars for 6 afternoons in his life, and he probably died at 63. So most of it is about community making and peacemaking. And I felt that since the Prophet Muhammad is being demonized so much by Islamophobic forces, both in the United States and Europe now, that a solid explication of his life as it is told by the Quran itself, which I take as my primary source, was really needed.
Has Sam Harris ever reached out to you for to engage you in your expertise on this subject? Just out of curiosity.
Oh no, I think Sam thinks he knows it all. He doesn't know Arabic and isn't really trained in religious studies. So much of what he says is just glib polemics. He blames nationalism on religion, and his basic argument is that all Muslims are really extremists, or Islam is always extreme, and that if it isn't, it's because Muslims are living with the blessings of modern enlightened society. And he never talks about, like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, who were atheists and who killed about 1/5 of the country. It's not only Muslims or religious people that have been involved in violence in the 20th century. There's Stalin and so forth. He seems to say that if only everybody were an atheist, we'd all be living in paradise, and that's clearly not true. And moreover, then he blames religion for many things that are actually about things like nationalism.
Well, I'm not necessarily in a position to criticize someone for glib polemics, but I do think that people should reach out if they are going to espouse such opinions to people who are experts. So I appreciate you coming on, Professor Juan Cole. The book is Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amid the Clash of Empires. We will put a link to it at majority.fm. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Sam, and you're the least glib person I've ever met.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. That was it's fascinating, and Professor Cole, the research that he has done here is extensive, and he's been doing this for decades. So check out that book if you have any interest, and also head over to his blog. It still remains a great source of information, particularly in of the Middle East. But broadly speaking, he's a very thoughtful guy, and that's Informed Comment. You can find, I think it is juancole.org. Juancole. We'll put a link to it at majority.fm and in the podcast description. I apologize for Skype. It has been very strange for the past couple of days. We're actually getting interference from other calls.
People on Reddit have been talking about it as well.
Oh, is that right?
Something's going on.
Yeah.
Waiting for a news story.
Very, very strange. And we've noticed that for 2 days now. But hopefully it was not too much of a distraction. Folks, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. Every day we try and bring you the best of analysis and news and interviews with in-depth interviews with legitimate scholars in their field.
Thought experiment.
Jamie's writing a piece about podcasts, and am I allowed to say that?
Sure.
She interviewed me by email because I don't like to talk to anybody in the office directly. So all of our exchanges are all by email.
It's a very solitary, quiet, monastic almost workspace.
It's a little bit strange in the office.
The show goes.
The only time that we talk is actually through the microphone, and then when the microphones are off, we just email each other, even if we're in the office. But it's got me, thinking about the various, sort of like podcasts and whatnot. And one of the things in comparing sort of the left podcasts to the right ones in terms of politics, I don't know about in other silos, is that my experience in watching the right-wing shows or podcasts, or at least, sort of peripherally, is that there is a lot of like circular, they all just interview each other. For the most part, sometimes they'll bring out, like another voice, but like the thrust of it is in talking to other commentators. I imagine there are other shows that are different from that, but I don't know them. I mean, even Rubin's show, it seems like every third show he does is interviewing someone he has interviewed for the 10th time. Like, how many times can that guy from Evergreen State, whose whole backstory was manufactured anyways, how much insight could this guy have about the world?
I could tell you, researching this book, not much.
Right. But I'm saying, they keep bringing on these same commentators over and over again. And I think it's very lucrative, because it is like building out a community of sorts, and there's constant reinforcement, and there's almost constant corralling of that community. But that just came up in the context of, I don't even know what I was talking about, why you should become a member of the show, because we try and endeavor to bring you voices who actually know what they're talking about. And then we try and
I was smeared.
Spice it spice it up by adding our voices that don't necessarily have the depth of knowledge of some of our guests, but that's where we get our knowledge. What is that guy from Evergreens? What does he even teach?
What does he teach? I don't remember. I think biology.
Yeah, is it honestly?
Yeah, I think biology.
Yeah, I mean, we have on other commentators too, but we also have on people who are actually doing research out there in the world, which is pretty unique, I think, versus the right.
I have such respect for Juan Cole, and he's formed so much of how I think and look at really important issues. I did find him saying that you were the least glib person he ever met alarming, because that may
undercut some of his credibility.
I was disturbed by that as a longtime reader.
But I will say in his defense that Skype has been acting up, and maybe he didn't hear we didn't quite hear him, or he didn't hear us quite clearly. So just a reminder, go to jointhemajorityreport.com, become a member today for just literally a couple of bucks a week. A couple quarters, well, not even a couple quarters a day. A couple of 32-cent pieces a day. Not even that. Nevertheless. Also, Brendan informs me that maybe it was because of Tuesday. I don't know what it was. But the hotcakes sold like hotcakes yesterday. Folks, I think we are close to, well, we're definitely close to less than a third of tickets left. We're going to sell out. I like to think that we're not going to sell out before Christmas, but I have a feeling that we might. We are doing a live show January 13th at the Bell House as part of the Brooklyn Pod Fest. It is 18 and over, $15 a person. Buy your tickets now, ladies and gentlemen. Buy them now. Don't come crying later, because it's not like we can build on an extension to the Bell House. It is what it is. Fire codes. So you can get your tickets at majority.fm or at Bell House, I imagine, or the Brooklyn Pod Fest. Also, justcoffee.coop is running a special this month, or for the next, I think, another week and a half. 30% off all your coffee. So check it out, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. No coupon code necessary for the next week and a half. Last night, Michael, it was Tuesday. Apparently, there was an enormous amount of drinking going on. The entire liquor cabinet was raided. God. But presumably there was other things that went on besides partying last night.
Not much. The title of last night's episode was More Like George H.W. Bad. And
was it really?
Yes. It's our most self-indulgent, consciously lame title we've ever done. But
I sort of like that.
It was a lot of fun. We did the George H.W. Bush drug cartel legacy, and the overlap between drug foreign policy and spikes in prison industrial complex in the United States. Mike Racine, great comic. Dave Rubin, Sam Harris impressions. Talked about Fred Hampton. A whole bunch of other stuff. And, of course, tickets to our show at the Bell House as well. Patreon.com/TMBS and Michael Brooks Show on YouTube and iTunes. Thanks.
And Jamie?
Out now on the Antifada, Sean and I recap a little bit of our magical Mexican vacation. We talk about why we love visiting Mexico, the legend of Trotsky's cookies, our car breakdown on the side of the road in Chiapas, La Chica Araña's summit with Corbyn and AMLO, a visit to Zapatista territory, our run-in with a caravan of internally displaced people, and, of course, a psychedelic Tinder love story. Check it out, folks.
Matt is out. Brendan,
this week on Literary Hangover, it's my birthday as Matt Leck. And
wait, is today Matt's birthday?
Matt's
birthday. Happy birthday, Matt.
Happy birthday, Matt. He's out. I was going to say he's out partying.
I think he's working on Literary Hangover.
Is he really?
Wow.
Oh.
Dedicated to his craft.
There you go. All right. We're going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920 is the number. We will take your phone calls. And See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck 'em.
Almost says what? Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Wow, I mean, some things that are therapeutic obviously can also be poisonous.
Sniffle. I'm gonna take on Chuck Schumer. Oh no, there's lavender.
No idea what you're talking about. People have no idea what you're talking about.
I know, but it was fun for me.
Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a 646. All right, excuse me. You're calling 646-257-3920, but you're calling from a 719 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, is this me?
I guess it is. Yes, it is you.
Okay, awesome. I'm Colton. I'm calling from Omaha, Nebraska.
Colton from Omaha, Nebraska. Well, I am a moderate-sized fan of Omaha. I've had.
You actually been there?
I've been there multiple times. I've
What are you
had
doing
a
up there?
couple of Bronco burgers and. Sure.
It's an awesome burger town. But anyway,
yeah.
I just wanted to ask you. I don't understand why you or TYT or any of you guys, and I'm a big fan of you guys. I don't understand why all you guys are losing your crap over AOC. I don't understand what the big deal is.
I'm not sure what you mean by losing my crap. I'm not sure you mean by losing my crap, but you mean are excited by?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
You don't know why we like her?
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you? I don't know why she's.
What's not to
such
like?
a big deal? Like I see
Beto
and I get excited about Beto.
Oh,
Just so
you
we
just,
just-
hold on.
We just
Everybody
have different
just calm down.
politics.
Hold on.
Well,
I mean,
it's not
I think
we
it's
just have
yeah.
different politics.
I mean, I think it's I like her politics. She is quite good, it seems to me, in a way that I haven't necessarily seen from Beto. Beto got involved in a New York race, for instance. All right, so AOC goes around the country, has been very supportive of politicians and politicians who hold issues that I think are very consistent with what we have on this program. Beto, to the extent that I know that he got involved in any race, he got involved in the attorney general race in New York. And he supported a candidate who, by all accounts, got into the race to basically run interference upstate and prevent Zephyr Teachout from winning. And I can tell you the forces that were concerned about Zephyr Teachout winning, the forces that were running to keep her from winning, are rather corrupt. Which is not to say that the people running against her, like Tish James was not running because she wanted to keep Zephyr Teachout from winning. What's his phrase from upstate New York? His name escapes me. Who Beto supported, was running to keep Zephyr Teachout out. That is, a very shorthand way of explaining why I'm excited about AOC versus Beto. I'm not unexcited by Beto. I think he's good. I think it would be a mistake for him to try and run for president, but maybe. I mean, rhetorically, I'm impressed. His record in the House is not stellar, but it was okay. But I think what we need in the House, in my estimation, is a stronger progressive caucus. We have a larger one.
I mean, Sam, the thing is that she lies a lot, and I understand if you're excited about her. Because
Give me an example of a lie.
More often, an example of a lie. Okay, so she lied about military budget increases on The Daily Show. She also lied about basic stats involving the U.S. population on The Daily Show. On her Twitter, she lied about the Pentagon budget.
There was a story about the Pentagon budget where they are now unable to even audit the Pentagon budget. To even audit it. They don't even have, listen, not only did they not audit the budget, it is such a disaster the way that they've been doing a record keeping, and impossible to imagine anything but on purpose, that they don't even have the ability to begin an audit because the mechanisms aren't in place.
Right. It's a mess, but it's not a $21 trillion mess like she tries to make it sound.
Okay, so she misspoke.
Right. Okay, so this is the thing I get from people. It's like, okay, she's just misspoken. She doesn't really know what she's talking about. Okay, then, again, I feel like I would be a lot easier on her if you guys on the left, or this far to the left as you and TYT are, you guys champion her, but you don't even give her a bit of fair criticism and say, okay, she misspeaks a lot sometimes.
Well, no, wait a second. What was the number that you gave of the budget on the Pentagon on The Daily Show?
She didn't do the Pentagon budget on The Daily Show. She did it on her Twitter, but on her Twitter, she said $21 trillion.
No, that was the audit story. That was the audit story. What was it that she misspoke about or lied about on The Daily Show?
On The Daily Show? Okay, so she said that the military wanted a $700 billion increase to their budget, which is incorrect. That's
correct. It has gone up. That is their entire budget. They wanted a $70 billion increase.
No, they didn't. That's wrong. That's factually inaccurate.
How much was the budget increase for the military this year?
I'm not sure exactly what I was, but I know that the entire budget was $700 billion.
I know that. We just agreed on that. The entire budget is $700 billion. What do you think the increase was this year?
I know it wasn't a 100% increase.
I didn't say it was a 100% increase. It was a $70 billion increase.
It was a 70 million.
It was 700 billion over the course of 10 years. Listen, so do you know how you must be familiar with how these budgets are drawn up, right? So very often what you'll end up hearing is, for instance, when people say $32 trillion increase, that's how much it's going to cost for, let's say, single payer, right? They're talking over a 10-year horizon. In this instance, they were talking about from like, I think 21 to 2022 to 2032. That's the way that people talk in Washington. You're correct. They did not want a $700 billion increase. The 2019 military budget, and I guess I was thinking of 2018, is an $82 billion increase from 2017. So yes, she misspoke. She said 700 billion where she should have said 70 billion. Maybe she was talking about over the course of a 10-year period, which is very often the way that budget's going. But what is the fundamental? So these two.
I don't like how she misspeaks all of these times because I feel like she's
all these
smarter than
times.
this. I think she's a really
all
smart
these times.
politician.
How many times have
Like
you
she
heard?
knows something.
Tell me something. How many times have you looked at the tweets of a congressperson or seen them on TV in the past 5 months? She's she's much more exposed than even Beto on national national media,
sure.
And so you're more conscious of two.
Politicians lie all the time.
Well, wait.
But you guys.
Do you think she's lying? Do you think that she would go on to the Daily Show and consciously lie and inflate the military budget by just coincidentally a factor of 10?
Well, do you think that she would go on to the Daily Show and just make a complete idiot of herself by getting population stats wrong?
Hey,
and
dude. Wait, what's the population stat now?
What issue do you really have?
Yeah, exactly. I'm listening.
Americans.
What?
Listen, okay, so she said that 200 million people would be 40% of the population, and that's just wrong.
Right, that's 60% of the population.
Yeah, I mean, that's closer, but still a little bit off. But yeah.
What is it,
So
Colton?
the thing is that
Colton, tell me what it is. What is 200 billion? What is 200 million of the population?
200 million? Well, let me do some quick math. on
Whoa.
this.
Just tell me. Tell me.
It is 61%.
Oh, 61%. All right, man.
What's the actual
Good
issue,
luck
dude?
with this.
What's going
Good
on
luck with
you?
this, honestly.
Just say that you have different
Yeah.
politics than her. Don't be so bizarre. You came with nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Colton, I'm sorry for lying to you. When I said it was 60%, I clearly lied to you. When we all know, after having done it on our calculators, it's 61%. But now, wait a second. Now, Colton, I think you've lied to me. Because it's 200 billion of what is 61%? You didn't put in 300 billion, did you?
No, I put
You're a
325.
fucking liar, dude.
325? Do you think that's the exact population figure of the United States? 325 million?
Don't lie.
Okay, Sam.
Wait, Colton, what is the exact? No, wait a second. You don't come on my show and start lying about the population, 325 million, when we all know it's 325,600,000.
Don't lie to us on our show.
Yeah, what are you doing, man?
Lying Colton.
Lying Colton. Loves Beto, loves to lie.
I get the point that you guys are making. I get the
Loves
point.
Beto,
Okay.
loves
You
to
gotta
lie.
hold your officials to this kind of standard.
What?
Oh, Jesus Christ. I wish that Beto was
Who do you think that ultimately benefits in the end? Like
Well,
the
yeah,
Democratic Party
what-
at large?
What's the agenda? What's the agenda on that?
Of holding people to this standard.
No. What do you think her agenda was when she went on and told this lie about the 40% population? What do you think was behind that lie?
Gulags.
Well, I feel like she likes to paint a picture that America's falling into complete nothingness, which I know a lot of people may agree with.
What does
her
that
on,
mean, nothingness?
But
what do you mean?
by nothingness, I mean that people's wages aren't even stagnating; they're going down. People have to hold multiple jobs to keep unemployment low, which is another lie she told on.
Wait, excuse me. Wait a second. Wait a second. First of all, in real dollars, people's wages are going backwards. Okay, that's a reality.
Really?
Yeah.
Where can I look that up?
On
literally anywhere.
The Google
machine.
The Google machine.
Okay.
You could read a review of Thomas Piketty's
Head over
blog.
to
read Thomas Piketty's blog if you want like actual economics on it. Read Piketty. That's the defining work on not only wage stagnation but global wealth inequality over the last several decades.
And it is the case that that the unemployment numbers for people who are, or I should say, the employment numbers for people who are underemployed is significantly higher than it has been in the past when we've had such unemployment numbers. Do you know what I'm saying? So
underemployed.
Yeah. Now
underemployed meaning people who can't get enough hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's still not what she said, but I feel like what she says helps out her narrative and
that America's falling into nothingness.
Because you guys can defend your politics without having to craft a lie or a misinformed.
What is it that you like about Beto? What do you like about Beto's politics?
What I like about Beto, I'm not so up on everything. The thing is that I'm more informed on AOC's politics because she's in the news all the time. But when I look at Beto and when I get like just a slight feeling about what Beto's about, I feel like he's more about being a rallying force for the entire nation.
When you look at him.
Now, wait a second.
When you
now
look
listen,
at the guy.
hold on. Now, Colton, wait a second. So you don't have
I'm not an expert, Sam.
No, I'm not asking you to be an expert, but you call in, you say you got a problem with AOC, and you like Beto. What do you like about Beto? He just seems more like everybody. That's what you just said. He just seems more like everybody.
Well, no, he's not more like everybody. He just seems like somebody everybody can get behind. That's what I want in a politician. That's why I hate Trump, and I don't like a lot of people who I see on the Democratic side. And when I look into the past, I want leaders like from the past,
like
who are able to rally the entire nation.
Like who?
And when I see Beto, I
well, no, like who? What leaders from the past? I just want to get to this because I feel like this is a mystery. This is a little bit you're a little bit like an onion. I want to peel a couple layers here. What leaders from the past, Colton?
You aren't gonna like this. None of you are gonna like this.
No,
Reagan.
I know.
Reagan. It's
No, it's not.
Yeah, I fucking love Reagan.
Told you. Haha. Of course you love Reagan.
But I feel like Reagan would be a Democrat today.
No, I actually wouldn't.
It depends.
Colton, you're lying about me. You lied about it. You lied about the Puerto Rican chick, and now you're lying about me.
Okay. So,
Beto wouldn't be a Republican either because
Okay,
even though
all
he
right.
supports TPP,
Who else besides Reagan?
he's totally
Who
gay about police violence.
What about?
But he does look like everybody else. If you know
What about
I'm
George?
saying.
Who were you more partial to? George W. Bush or Al Gore or John Kerry?
I like John Kerry.
Mhm.
I like John Kerry more than I like Al Gore.
What about Bush?
But
Because
I probably
that's
would've-
who the choice was
I
between.
probably would have voted for Al Gore over Bush back in the day.
Hmm.
I liked. I don't know how to feel about HW, especially in the wake of his death.
Right.
Reagan's the best, closest, personal example. Lyndon Baines Johnson was an
Colton,
amazing
how old are
president.
you?
I feel like he was able
Colton,
to
let me
rally
ask how
people.
old you are.
Fucking A.
I'm 20.
Okay.
Colton.
All right. Well, listen. All right. So, all right. Because
Wait,
you're
I have
20.
one. What, do you
because
like
you're 20.
Obama? Do you like Obama?
I like. There's some. I feel like there's good and bad. A bit more good.
Let me tell you something, bro. If you love Beto and you don't love Obama, you got to really self-assess. That's all I'll say.
They are.
Obama's so tied up in this corruption machine.
Wait, what?
Obama has all this corporate PAC money and such, and he's willing to sell us down the line.
Dude,
Do you know
gotta
where
read
Beto
into
gets his money?
You got to read into
Beto's
Beto a
family
little bit.
are some of the biggest landlords in the entire state of Texas. He was able to not get PAC money because he has an unbelievably wealthy family he could draw from.
And you got to
he
look at who he
supported-
was supporting.
I'm okay with that.
And,
I'm fine with that.
Colton,
I would much rather them be
I know, I
independently
understand.
wealthy
You
and
should
not
also
taking
money from the
you should
oil and
also
gas lobby.
you should also look into Ronald Reagan and who his benefactors were. Listen, Colton, I'm going to cut you some slack. You're 20 years old. You're on a path, buddy. Just, be careful of the turns that you're taking going forward.
I think
Go
what that
back-
young man said about
But I
Beto
appreciate the
looking
call.
like everybody else was very salient.
I
Thanks for taking my call.
All right, appreciate it, man. Thanks. I mean, I honestly, if Colton had
The
said
new
to me,
racism is the anti-white racism.
if Colton had said to me, "I'm 45," I would have had a bit of a problem with Colton. But
Colton.
age 20, look, I think it's you got to.
Colton, there's a gay Jew named Dave Rubin. Now, in my day, we didn't pretend to like homos. We just denied them AIDS treatment. But he makes a lot of sense when it comes to
Some
the
of my
campus culture.
best friends literally were gay. But of course, we were going to just let them all die anyways because that was the way I was going to get elected.
We gave Rock Hudson the drugs on the down low, as the criminal community says. More broadly, we did nothing for them because, well, it's just as the Jew explained it.
There you go.
Thanks, everyone.
The other Jew.
Let's check back in with Colton when he's trying to survive on his own in the world, assuming that he's not yet.
The problem with AOC is that, unlike me, she isn't incredibly precise in detail. I absolutely never misspoke about government statistics or any other empirical facts of governing.
Never. To the extent that I was actually conscious.
I was so precise, I didn't even know about massive global criminal conspiracies that happened in my administration.
Ask me again about the Iran-Contra affair. I'll just, I'll dazzle you.
Colton, if you're listening, look up. Ronald Reagan literally did a press conference, and you correct me if I'm wrong, where he said something to the effect of like,
I don't think we did it, but all the facts appear to state otherwise.
with regards to, by the way, supporting
ketchup is a vegetable. How's
Jelly
that
bean,
one?
anyone?
The trees are. Was he the one who said that, or was that Bush? Now I'm confused about the trees.
James Watt. It was one of their interior secretaries.
Yeah.
Said that's great.
All right, let's take one more
There's
phone call.
something about AOC. She doesn't look like everybody.
And he fucking lost. Sorry, effing.
He ran to be fair, he ran a much more uphill fight. Running for Senate in Texas is not the equivalent of winning in Queens. But
That's true. There's a lot more people there who look like everybody else.
Calling from a 256 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sin, this is Kurt from Alabama.
Oh, Kurt from Alabama. Well, you got a problem with something, Kurt?
No, I'm not a libertarian. I'm actually a big fan of the show.
Okay, well, fair enough. What's going on?
So just this past week, there was a new 18-month peer-reviewed study released by the Political Economy Research Institute regarding Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. And the study indicated that if we replace our current healthcare system with Bernie's Medicare for All system right now over a 10-year period, we'd save $5.1 trillion over that time frame. And now I've noticed that since the news has broken about this study, the mainstream outlets like New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Associated Press, etc., haven't covered this study at all.
Barely covering it. Barely. Yeah. And we remember how much, first of all, you contemplate how much coverage the Mercatus study got, which which ultimately actually showed that the plan would save $2 trillion. When you look at the study that during the campaign, the coverage that it got, of course. I mean, look, people should not have any illusions about this. If Bernie ends up running, And to the extent that there's going to be a big campaign, regardless of whether it's Bernie or not, on single payer, the forces that the major forces in our society are going to ally against it. So this is not going to come easy, and we're going to have to promote these things and get it into the consciousness of people. This is going to be a big project over the next 2 to 4, 5, 10, 50 years. I mean, that's, yeah. This study was an incredibly comprehensive study. I've seen very little bit about it, and to be fair, we haven't even talked about it that much here as well.
Yeah, I mean, even if it didn't save massive amounts of money, it would still be the right thing to do. But it's a great figure to be able to show to the people who say, "Ooh, but how are we going to pay for it?"
Well, yeah, and the point of it saving the massive amounts of money is really, I think, important, insofar as that's the only reason why you wouldn't do it. Like, why would you not? I mean, there'll be a libertarian who'll call and he'll talk about like the moral hazard involved in, if you provide everyone with health care, soon they're all going to want food, or they're all going to want, a job, or,
which would be great.
Which would be great. But I mean, that's the libertarian argument. But in terms of cost, I mean, look, this should not be surprising, at least in terms of back of the envelope type of calculations. We know that Medicare, which provides health insurance for 1/4 of the population, has an operating expense 1/10 of what private insurance does. Something like 2 cents on every dollar is spent in Medicare towards the administration of that program, and at least 20 cents on every dollar is spent in the private insurance industry, which does not even include the savings that would happen in terms of administration on the supplier side, and the savings on sort of like uncharged administration on the demand side. Right? Because I don't get paid for the 3 hours I've spent at least a month dealing with paying the checks for, $1.45 or whatever it is, or 25 cents or whatever it is from my kids going to this place, or trying to get back $100 from the dentist appointments they had, or whatever it is. I mean, the savings comes across the board, and it's just more efficient. We understand this in every other realm. It's just, except for where people don't want to understand it. But Kurt, I promise to talk more about this study next week.
Great, sounds good. I 100% agree with you.
Appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Ronald Reagan lives. Okay. So let's talk about the fortunes, and we didn't get a chance really to talk about it with Juan Cole, but it's worth reading him on what's going on with MBS. But yesterday on the Hill, Gina Haspel, the torturer in chief, the CIA director, went to Capitol Hill to talk to some leading senators as to the evidence that the CIA possesses on the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a U.S. resident and a columnist for the Washington Post. I can't quite figure out what is going on with people like Lindsey Graham, let's say, who have every reason in the world to be large allies of Saudi Arabia and their moves to, which would ultimately either bring about some type of war and attack on Iran, in their struggle for long-term geopolitical strength against Iran. But whatever Gina Haspel told Lindsey Graham, he seems very, very exercised about it.
I think Secretary Pompeo and Mattis are following the lead of the president. There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. You have to be willfully blind not to come to the conclusion that this was orchestrated and organized by people under the command of MBS, and that he was intricately involved in the demise of Mr. Khashoggi.
There you go. I mean, the guy's going on talking about the saw that was used, the bone saw that was used to essentially dispose of Jamal Khashoggi's body. And I suspect the briefing they got from Gina Haspel was rather explicit. And they are not letting go of this. I mean, for the life of me, do you have any sense of like what? Because I don't know if Graham just has other sense of who are better allies within the Saudi royal family, and but I haven't seen much reporting of that. Have you? I haven't.
A little bit. I mean, the two things I could speculate is that first, yes, there's definitely other people who would be less reckless than him, but would still have the same core policies. And then there was a thing, we didn't pull it because it was one of those things like, I didn't advocate pulling it because it's like, I don't know what the frame is around it. It was weird, but maybe we should play it later, where Macron greeted MBS at the G20, and the hot mic picked them up with Macron being like, "You don't listen to me." And MBS is like, I listen, and giving him like that warm smile that he gives. And I think that part of the subtext of all of this, and please, in no way is this, MBS, it's obviously a total monster, but I do think there's some element of people reacting to the fact that he doesn't listen, including to them. And the same pattern that he usurped people that were ahead of him in the family and has been a rule breaker and a defier, that's applying to traditional allies and power relationships. And it's easier to, you can mess around.
Just too much of a wild card.
Yeah. And you can mess with Trump all day because he could just get on the phone and tell Trump that he's great. But
Right.
I think people like Graham and Macron are like, wait a second, you're really
Stepping
not
out of
gonna
line.
listen to us. Yeah.
He's counter-establishment, man.
Right.
We must like him.
He's a disruptor. Total disruptor.
Pretty strong words. Impressive. All right. Well, let's play this clip from Laura Ingraham. This is always nice. Yesterday on Fox News. One thing that occurs to me. Do you know during the interview when Professor Cole was talking about that chapter, that verse in the Christian Bible about Jesus said, "Pick up the sword"? You know where I first heard that? Sean Hannity said that.
Was it
years ago?
Was for about invading Iraq or something?
This was, I don't know in the context, but I think back in the aughts, Hannity, who I think is very strong with the Jesus Jews, and particularly in the context of things like lying for the Lord and picking up the sword, that type of stuff, when I think that he thought his career was going to go more in that direction, was a little bit more open with expressing those sentiments.
It's weird that it's less fashionable to do that these days.
Well, I don't think it's less fashionable. I just think that there's other opportunities in terms of money, and you don't have to necessarily go there. You can play a little more close to the vest. When he came on to the Majority Report, we had him on earlier than I think Janine and I were prepared to do in terms of our skill set. But he wanted Janine on his program because at that time she was a huge ratings draw on conservative media because all the old men who watched it loved to say, like, oh, that dumb girl doesn't know what she's talking about, type of thing, which is really actually not much different from the Fox News model now. But
tried and true.
I mean, that's why Tucker Carlson was so obsessed with Lauren Duca, and I mean we see this over and over again, and to a large extent, why the right is loves to go after AOC. women are always a prime target for conservatives.
Yeah, women of color, they get a 2-for-1.
It's a twofer. And but he came on the Majority Report, and Janine actually thought at that time that she could sort of convince him with reason. And I was a little bit more skeptical. I did ask him, do you think we're living in end days? And he got very mad when I asked him that question. He did not want to answer that question. Just a little side note. So, folks, Laura Ingraham has some incredible insight into the move across the country to end the extolling of racists and what they represented. Look, we have some very bad chapters in our history. Some of them are ongoing, frankly, as a society, like most societies. There are bad chapters in all of these societies. The question is, how do you teach future generations about those bad chapters? Do you extol the figures? Would you want there to be, if you were in Germany, a statue that uncritically praises, let's say, I don't know, Adolf Eichmann? Would you want that in Germany? I would imagine no, you would not. Could you have museums? Could you have plaques that describe Eichmann's role in a very dark period of their society? Yes, of course. You don't want to deny history, but you also want to make sure that your record of history reflects your understanding of the mistakes that were made at that time. Laura Ingraham apparently does not understand that concept, or does, and wants to pretend that concept is silly.
Cut and dried. There's a movement, particularly among the young, to hate the past and eradicate anything they find objectionable or troubling. And look, every country, all history, has its bad sides, it has its good sides. Good stuff, bad stuff. But this recalls the kind of destructive mindset of, let's say, ISIS. Think about ISIS, what they did. They pillaged and they wiped away irreplaceable historical and religious monuments. From Palmyra, remember, in Syria, simply because they could. It was offensive to them. Now, no matter what one thinks of the way this was all treated after the Civil War, whether they should have built these monuments or not, this happened, okay? The Confederacy happened. And we owe it to the future to leave history as it existed undisturbed. Continue to debate it. Have conversations about it. But why not allow future generations the opportunity to mark this history, process it, and come to their own conclusions? Put up another statue commemorating the slaves who were abused and killed adjacent to Silent Sam. But to destroy instead of engage, to defy the law instead of respect it, is no way to honor the past or the future or to highlight all the gains America has made. Now, all
right, so exactly, it's an interesting rhetorical trick that she's playing here. Now, we know that ISIS destroyed these, they destroyed these statues because of religious differences, not just because they found it offensive. And people aren't getting rid of these statues simply because they're offensive. They're getting rid of them because they tell the wrong story and interpretation of history. These people were not to be extolled. If you're very concerned about Silent Sam and you want that history to exist, then raise money to create a little mausoleum for Silent Sam, put it there, and put it in the context of a memorial that actually tells history from the perspective that we now understand it, that this was a very dark period, that there were people who were fighting and were told you need to fight because this is about our sovereignty, as opposed to about our ability to maintain slaves for economic purposes that really you're not going to benefit from. And if you want to tell that story, you can tell it. But the idea that we don't, would Laura Ingraham say this about some of the 100-year-old, 200-year-old townhouses that were destroyed here in this neighborhood of Brooklyn for a hotel? Would she say that? Of course not.
She becomes like an anti-gentrification activist.
Yeah,
It's
of course
history.
not. Of course
You
not.
can't
This is
eliminate history.
absurd. This is absurd.
Where's your check to the Paul Robeson Theater in Fort Greene?
Of course, exactly.
Moron.
Exactly. I remember when Laura Ingraham had chained herself to the Strand because she was afraid that it might get taken over by Barnes & Noble.
That's right.
And she's acting like the jury's still out on the Confederacy.
Right. We
And
can
it's
still
just like
debate
both
this.
sides, you know?
Right. And the bottom line is, the problem is that these statues do not reflect our history. They are propaganda. Just because they was built doesn't mean that it should stay there for eternity without some form of reinterpretation, or frankly, just it sends the wrong message.
Yeah, that's a big part of why we study history, right? So that we can create sort of a living concept of what these things meant to us as a people.
I mean, she's not concerned about the Indian, the Native American villages that some of these cities are built on. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd.
Yeah, I actually think it's a great way to engage with history, to take down the statues venerating the Confederacy.
It's that. I mean, in some ways, what you really should be doing is a video installation of people taking down the statue. And that would really teach history.
Very engaging.
Meanwhile, just earlier in this this network feed from Fox News, one hand they talk about how horrible it is that you would in any way reinterpret the celebration of people fighting to enslave other people. Bring on Tucker Carlson, who is going to also scare white people as to their future.
But hold on, no, but that's not what you're saying. Hold on. You just said we need to bring in people because Americans aren't reproducing in sufficient numbers. And
Pause
my
it for 1
question is-
second. I should tell you that he's talking to Louis Miranda about immigration. Go ahead.
Why aren't our leaders thinking about how our people can afford to have children? They don't even consider that a subject worth studying, much less trying to fix. It's just like, oh, well, they're not having enough kids.
But
why
those
doesn't
are mutually
anyone care
exclusive
enough?
things. Those aren't mutually exclusive things.
You're saying that our low birth rates are the justification for immigration. I'm saying our low birth rates are a tragedy that say something awful about our economy and the selfish stupidity of our leaders.
It's a
But you don't seem to
combination of
care.
our growth and our prosperity that enables us to have a stronger economy. So there's definitely a both sides to this where you can look at who are going to be hurt. But when you've looked at states like Georgia and others that have implemented anti-immigrant measures that forced a lot of these immigrants out, what you saw was food rotting on the vines, a lot of lost crops because there weren't enough people there to work them. And so the reality is that we can both do something about
That's
strengthening the
actually not-
economy for people who are
Okay,
suffering
so-
and who are American
Right,
and who have lived here their whole lives. They want to have children. They want to have an opportunity to do better than their parents
Maybe
did.
someone should care
That's
about
important.
them a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the most
Absolutely.
important thing. Nothing
but,
is
but
even
that
close
doesn't
to
mean
as
that we have to
important as that.
demonize the immigrants who are legitimate
I'm
victims
not
of this
demonizing
process.
anybody. I'm not against the immigrants. I'm just
Yes.
for Americans, and nobody cares about them.
Yes,
Now,
nobody
shut
cares
up,
about
you're dying,
Americans.
We're going to replace you. And it,
Tucker Carlson, nobody cares about Americans. First of all, his premise is wrong. It is expensive to have children in our society. Surely there are some people who make the decision not to have kids because of cost. The reality is that women in the highest bracket of incomes, 20% of incomes, are 5 times less likely to have children than people living in the lowest income bracket. Now, certainly we should be making it easier for Americans to have children. And I appreciate Tucker Carlson coming out strongly in favor of things like universal child care, like universal paid sick leave, like universal mandatory maternity and paternity leave. All of these things. Medicare for all. Medicare for all of these things would help in raising children. But the idea that there's a low birth rate, which is common amongst as nations become more wealthy, because people had children because they needed labor.
Didn't it fall off after the recession?
The fact, what's that? The
birth rate.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It fell
I
off
think,
quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think people. I think people tend to react to specific moments, but broadly speaking, the reality is that one of the reasons why immigration is a net positive is because of the aging of our population.
But I just want to say, I mean, this is another, I always say really watch Tucker Carlson because he's very clever and he knows how to latch on to some totally legitimate and real issues. And
well, the
this
point
is
is
like
that
a thing. No, but I'm
he's
saying
never going to take the next step and actually
100%
offer
not.
any.
Of course, and that's exactly where you always need to go. So it's a
Right.
two-front war. You need to, of course, debunk and respond to his bigotry and his barely dog-whistling racism. But you also need to if I was ever on TV with Tucker, I'd be like, Tucker, I reject X, and actually on these other things, not only are you raising a good point, I 100% agree with you. So join me in card check, Medicare for all, universal paid sick leave. I'm looking forward to it.
We can do this, man.
We could do it, and I'm including, and we could fund it with a tax rate of 90% on, return to Eisenhower levels. It doesn't even have to be that radical. Basic, moderate, progressive stuff. Are you with me? And then he'll be like, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have you on.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 508 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Worcester Mike.
Worcester Mike. What's up? What's happening in Worcester?
Mike. Well, I'm not in Worcester. I'm in Omaha. I moved out here with my wife a few years ago, so I wanted to thank you for taking it easy on my fellow Omaha.
I was gonna say, maybe you got to go to Bronco Burger and sit down with Colton and figure this stuff out.
How does everything look out there?
So I literally was laughing out loud with Michael with your impression of Reagan there. That was great.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, Colton's young. He doesn't really know what's going on, so we'll give him a pass.
I think he knows exactly
I think
what's
the
going
fact
on.
that he's interested is probably a good sign.
Agree.
So I had a quick question for you. What's worse than Ben Shapiro challenging AOC to a debate?
I don't know.
The answer is Dave Rubin challenging AOC to a debate with Ben Shapiro.
Right.
So he's on Twitter shooting at her, saying that she should come on in his show.
Still harassing her about that? Wow.
Well, I saw it a few days ago, and I've been trying to get on the line here to call you guys, but I didn't know if you guys had seen this and stuff.
I had not seen that.
Yeah, he likes. What happens is that whenever somebody from the left does anything that's gets popular, Dave Rubin comes in and challenges them to debate Ben Shapiro, which I just don't understand at all.
He's too chicken to even debate them himself.
Exactly. And Sam, you may remember this. You remember that show, Welcome Back, Kotter?
Of course.
Do you remember that guy? I can't remember the character's name, but he was like their arch enemy, and he had that sidekick, the black sidekick.
Yes.
And every time you go ahead.
I know. I remember that guy now. Who played that guy?
And he would always, whenever he made like a funny comment, the black guy would come out and go, "Yeah, did you hear what he said?"
Yeah.
That to me is what Dave Rubin is.
True. Just
literally
trying
like,
to have an open exchange of ideas. Yeah.
No, this kid, it was very funny. It was, I know what you're talking about. We'll look that up. That'll be good. That should be a drop. He just called you a bad guy.
Drop.
All right. Well, I appreciate the call.
Totally what he did. Hey, thanks for everything, man. Left is best.
Thanks.
Left is best.
What's the mic? It's not in Worcester anymore, but
everyone's moving to Omaha.
I guess so. That's where it's all happening. On the IM, the Chris Lapaco. Any thoughts on Tim Black calling you out on Twitter today? I have not had a chance to assess that.
Rachel
I can't
Cedar.
sleep. I keep wondering how bad Flynn screwed over Trump. I'm sure I'm sure all of our favorite middle of the road moderate Dems are still up too. They're probably up doing the Carlton. Hey, Sam Cedar. Is that the the tweet?
I don't get it. I don't understand.
I think the Carlton is a dance.
I know what the Carlton is. That's from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But is he saying that Michael Flynn is lying about Trump, and so we're happy? I don't get it.
I keep wondering how bad Flynn screwed over Trump. I'm sure all of our favorite middle of the road Democrats are still up too. They're probably up doing the Carlton. I
don't get it. I mean, if he's, I guess generically, if you're accusing people who are actually socialists of being happy that Donald Trump might get some political heat, yes. I didn't do the Carlton when I found out about this, though, for the record. And you wouldn't do the Carlton. You would do Hotline Bling.
Yeah, I would never.
The guy
do
doesn't
the
follow the show.
Wow.
Yeah. Offensive.
Why is he lying? Attorney Andrew, hello. 3 things. We have, first, have we discussed the John Dingell article in the Atlantic calling for the abolishment of the calling for abolishing the Senate? I have not. I have it here. I mean, the argument is we're going to get a much more democratic society, and that by what we're doing with the Senate is we are subsidizing an ideology that in the marketplace of ideas would simply fade away were it not for this subsidy. The you can call it the I don't know what Dingell calls it, but I would call it the sort of the rural affirmative action program, where we are subsidizing the political power of people just because they live in wide open spaces, and they get an immeasurate amount of political power in the Senate. And so he says abolish the Senate. I got to read into it a little bit more.
I will say about the Mueller team, they got subpoenas, and I like that.
Oh, yeah, I heard about this. There's a charter school teacher strike in Chicago. We got to get more on that as well.
Oh, hell yeah.
Dingell also suggested moving toward full electoral participation by automatically registering all American citizens to vote when they turn 18. We were
cosign.
able to do it with the draft, more or less. And third, Amy Klobuchar told Chris Matthews she's mulling a run for president. The list of nondescript Dems without the cachet of Clinton are lining up for their circular firing squad and clearing the way for Bernie.
Yup.
I remember when I was teaching, I effing hated how kids lied on their pop quiz all the time. Not that that's the answer, Timmy. No, that's not the answer, Timmy. Lying bitch. I think he's sort of mocking Colton a little bit. That's not very
I like it.
Winnipeg Craig. This is a ways off, but the 100-year anniversary of the Winnipeg General Strike is in the first half of 2019. Thank you for getting us. It's considered one of the largest, most significant labor actions in North American history. The anniversary is going to be a huge celebration of labor. Maybe look into booking an academic or two as a guest to talk about the history and the legacy of it. Come on, Brendan. Put that on the list. It's a general strike.
Let's do it again.
Classless creative, apropos of nothing. I had a surreal dream last night that I was watching MR and all of you started talking to a crew member named Caden. I was baffled because everyone was acting like they'd always been there. I thought I was going insane, and then I realized I was in a dream and woke up. Very strange. Gumshoe Goy. Can MR add a 5th show to the network hosted by Pamela Anderson and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad called Dicks Out for Haram Bay?
It is pretty amazing that Pamela Anderson. I mean, Ahmadinejad, it's very on brand. He's going to have some global woke takes. What's funny?
Baba Ganoush, Sam Cedar, the man whose idea of light reading is a Social Security trustee report, believes Google Analytics is too dry. Pot, meet kettle. Career politicians and businessmen can say, write any shit they want, but a 29-year-old bartender after winning her first campaign to be held to a higher level of scrutiny. It's a funny world. You know, I'll tell you what I found
lying all the
super
time. All she
impressive.
does is lie and lie.
There was a tweet with a picture of AOC from like 10 years ago, 15 years ago,
Lying.
12 years ago. No. She came in second, I think, in the 2007 like New York State Science Fair.
She probably faked her experiment results.
And I can't remember even what it was necessarily, but some statistical stuff. And then things start making sense. You know, that like, oh, she's like a science genius.
Yeah, like a scientist. She lies all the time.
Right. So
Yeah.
like a scientist, she lies.
What's she going to tell us now? The Earth is warming? Colin, Nebraska, as someone who took over 32 credit hours of accounting, don't do it. I will, however, offer auditing services for the Majority Report. Something tells me VIP attendees are getting scammed for the MR Live event. We do not have a VIP for the MR Live event.
I do.
TMBS,
baby.
There's
so
a strict
that is where
hierarchy.
the scamming is taking place.
Strict hierarchy.
Chewy, my girlfriend and I just booked a flight from South Carolina to come see you guys at the Bell House. Looking
Sweet.
forward to meeting all of you. There you go.
Bring your winter coat.
That's awesome. Yeah, stay warm.
You get one of those. Majority Report thought, happy birthday, Matt. You are a hot piece of ass.
I'll accept the compliment on Matt's behalf since I'm in this seat. Thank you.
Maybe they just got
Transitive
confused
property.
about the seat. Morella, are Brandon and Matt twins, brothers, cousins maybe? I can't tell them apart. I don't know if it's just me. And they are both extremely cute, by the way. The whole team is attractive and smart.
Matt
Wow.
is of good Norwegian stock.
good
and
I am.
I am of dubious Northeastern stock.
Are you
Yeah.
Irish, you mean?
I'm everything. I'm like
Like
ethnically
Dutch,
Northeast.
Irish,
Yeah.
English.
I was going to say that's racist, but then they gave us all compliments, so.
Boink,
it's
boink,
okay.
boink, boink. Had to agree with Dave Rubin, but I hate to agree with Dave Rubin, but F the post office and F George Herbert Walker. I want my effing package to come in. Wish I went with privatized mail. No, I don't get any of that. But
What?
I'm not sure exactly what that's about. Oh, okay. So what are we doing? The Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani, ladies and gentlemen, upon hearing the, I don't know, was this a response to the Mueller filing? I'm not sure. Yes, he did. It was a response. And Rudy Giuliani was very angry. He wrote, Mueller filed an indictment just as the president left for G20. That is G-20, period. In July, he indicted the Russians who will never come here just before he left for Helsinki, period. Either could have been done earlier or later. Out of control, exclamation point. Supervision, please, question mark. Now, Rudy apparently wanted to save character space, even though I think he probably had significantly more, right? It doesn't look like 240. And so what he did was G-20, period, IN. Now, Rudy Giuliani, as you know, was named a part of the chair of a cybersecurity commission in the Trump administration. What he does not seem to be aware of is that .in is actually a suffix that is used in hyperlinking, just like .fm, if you will, majority .fm. And if I was to write G20.fm on Twitter, it would create a hyperlink.
A very boring podcast.
Yes. Well, and there you go. And so some entrepreneurial spirit apparently either had G-20.in or bought G-20in. And when you click it, it goes to this page which says at g-20.in, Donald J. Trump is a traitor to our country. And then also breaking. Special counsel calls ex-National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's cooperation substantial. Recommends no jail time. Rudy Giuliani got wind of this. Go back. And he had this to say. Twitter allowed someone to invade my text with a disgusting anti-president message. The same thing, dash, period, no space, dash, occurred later, and it didn't happen. Don't tell me they are not committed card-carrying anti-Trumpers. Time magazine may also fit that description. Fairness, please. Now, I will decipher for you because my parents are somewhere around Rudy Giuliani's age. So if you scroll up, what Rudy Giuliani thinks happened is that Twitter allowed someone to hack his text with a hyperlink, not invade my text. It's also not a text. It's a tweet. The same thing, he argues, a period, no space, occurred later in his text/tweet. That was when he said Helsinki.either, period either. And it didn't happen because Rudy doesn't understand that .in is a suffix that creates a hyperlink, whereas .either is not a suffix that creates a hyperlink. So there is no website that could be formed from Helsinki.either.
He's having a rough night.
Yes. And then he
Cyber
mentions
is difficult.
Time magazine because I think he was drunk. So there it is. Rudy Giuliani.
Yep, someone got into my Twitter and
Invaded
they invaded
my-
it. They invaded it. Mueller's out of control.
He's always been a racist fascist. Was he always like a drunk jackass?
Yeah. Well, I don't think he was a drunk jackass. But maybe.
But a jackass.
Maybe.
And I'm speculating he's drunk as being generous.
The National Republican Congressional Campaign Committee apparently has been hacked. None of the emails have been released, but they were accessed. Republicans were made aware of this. Donald Trump has no time machine, so unfortunately he cannot go back to this moment when in July, this is July of what? July of this year, he was still talking about the DNC security problems as being an embarrassment.
President Bush said that he saw into his soul. I think he came to regret that. You said that Putin toyed with Obama. How do you ensure that things are different in this administration?
I don't know. Look, I've met him 2 times, 2.5 times. Most of you people were there when I met him. I think that I may have a very good relationship, and I think I may have a very bad relationship with him. I have no idea.
I mean, I don't know how you could sound any more guilty about having a weird relationship with somebody than to offer up that stuff completely unprompted.
Here's a bunch of very strange verbiage.
Yeah.
To clear that.
I have, before I answer this question, I have a couple of non sequiturs that, in my mind, make it seem like I absolutely have no illicit relationship with this man.
Before I answer your question, I would like 3 non sequiturs, 2 incredibly suspicious sounding statements, and 1 just
At the very least,
total
it
random.
proves how nuts this guy is.
Oh yeah, I'm
that
very
he
unwell.
is he's convinced that he looks guilty. I don't know if he is or he isn't of whatever it is that he thinks he is, but he's so convinced that he looks guilty that he makes himself look even more guilty by saying that I didn't do it.
I mean, look, I'm not an idiot. Even if I did nothing
Like-
wrong, offering to give him a $50 million penthouse doesn't look good.
It's not like, let me just start by saying it's not like I was still negotiating for a huge tower in Russia during the campaign. That's not what it looks like.
I was doing really cool stuff instead.
So-
Even if I did, it was very cool and legal.
Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I probably didn't. I don't know. Maybe I didn't.
Paris
Yeah,
Denard was involved. It
go
was
back
cool.
and just understand that he is now saying that Obama was weak because he allowed the Russians to hack into, and by all accounts, we don't know if it's the Russians, but we know that it's at least as reported that it was a foreign entity that hacked into these emails.
Were there when I met him. I think that I may have a very good relationship, and I think I may have a very bad relationship with him. I have no idea. I love the United States. He obviously loves Russia. He's for Russia, I'm for the U.S. We'll have to see what comes of it, but I think we have a chance to have a very good relationship. I mean, the couple of times I've met him, we got along very well. They were very short meetings, but we got along very well.
No collusion, for instance.
And if I got along with him, that's a good thing. You know, we're a magnificent, powerful country. They're a very powerful country. We're a nuclear country. They're a nuclear country. And getting along is a good thing, not a bad thing.
It's a good thing. We could use
the
more
Russians
buildings.
Were indicted. Would you ask Putin to send them here?
Well, I might. I hadn't thought of that, but I'll be asking about it. But again, this was during the Obama administration. They were doing whatever it was during the Obama administration. And I heard that they were trying, or people were trying to hack into the RNC too, the Republican National Committee. But we had much better defenses. I've been told that by a number of people. We had much better defenses,
Everybody's
so they couldn't.
saying it.
I think the DNC should be ashamed of themselves for allowing themselves to be hacked.
I love this guy. Like that was America under the Obama administration.
I was
You get a
told-
do-over here. You get a do-over.
I was told by Arnold Palmer,
But-
great golfer, that
I think-
our security was better.
I think people who didn't get hacked.
Yeah, the first half of that answer had nothing to do with the question.
Nope.
He just heard the word Russia, and he just like I'm glad you brought up what's going on in Crimea because I have not colluded with anybody.
Super glad you
And
asked me that question.
It's not like I have a building that I was pursuing. Like, for instance, that never happened. Maybe it did happen. Maybe it didn't happen. If it mattered, it happened. It wouldn't have mattered. What was the question? Meanwhile,
no crime.
We haven't talked that much about this. I mean, this case is heinous, and I mean, we brought it up peripherally over the years, probably. But this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, I don't know if he's a billionaire or just a 100 millionaire, but I have a feeling.
I think he was I think he hit billion.
And had relationships with all sorts of major media and political figures, including Bill Clinton and Alan Dershowitz.
What?
And Donald Trump. There have been some pretty explicit accusations about Alan Dershowitz. I don't know about anyone else. I haven't heard any explicit accusations about Bill Clinton in the context of Epstein. I've definitely heard that he was on a manifold where he took a flight with him or used his plane. Not
We know
necessarily.
that.
What's that?
That's known. He's in
Yes.
the flight logs.
Oh, yes, that's what I'm saying. It's been reported that he
Steve
was in the
Pinker's
manifold.
also been on his jet.
The idea of politicians going on millionaires and billionaires' planes, not too uncommon. But the specifically in terms of Dershowitz, there's been a lot more explicit accusations, I think, by victims or alleged victims. So what happens is there was a lawsuit that was threatening to essentially try almost for the first time Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, or a retry. Because what had happened before is that Epstein had made a plea deal with a federal prosecutor years ago that was about as good of a deal as you could ever get, having been essentially copping to sexually assaulting dozens of underage women and sexual trafficking. He was basically allowed to register as a sex offender and then lead his life almost completely unfettered. That trial was set to start, I think, within a day. They were going to start to pick the jury for this lawsuit, and Epstein settled. In other words, bought off all the plaintiffs who are bringing this case. However, apparently this is not the end of it. Oh, I should also mention the U.S. attorney in Florida who gave Epstein this sweetheart deal was a guy named Acosta, who is now the head of Labor Department under Donald Trump,
which oversees human traffic laws in the country.
Cool.
Takes one to know one. And
I want a bad guy.
Here is one of the attorneys from the plaintiffs who apparently have a phase 2 planned.
We're going to have a volume of victims that are going to come forward and be ready to testify and not get cross-examined. Testify about what happened to them in a way that will help them heal.
It would take a fool not to recognize that he faces extremely serious jeopardy at this point. He faces the distinct possibility that his sweetheart plea bargain can get set aside and that he and others will face federal criminal prosecution.
There's a federal case also pending here in West Palm Beach involving Epstein and the secret agreement that the federal government reached with him not to prosecute him federally if he would plead guilty to a couple of state charges. He did 13 months in jail. He's a sex offender registered, but he could have gone to prison for life if he had been prosecuted federally.
So this is not over, and I have a feeling there's a lot of very nervous people. Not just Epstein, because I have a feeling that at one point he's going to decide there's some other fish here that can be fried. So this story is not going to go away, and it sounds like a super, super creepy one.
Oh, it could not be more disgusting and grotesque. Also, I'm paraphrasing it, but in the first New York Magazine article that was written before he was charged, there was just sort of like, who is this guy? There's some fishy stories about him. I think it was Phil Weiss wrote it. He interviewed Trump, and Trump said something to the effect of, we both like young girls. That I will tell you. That I will tell you.
Let's go to the phone, calling from a 267 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Pat from South Philly.
Pat from South Philly. What's on your mind?
I just want to make a quick. This is my first time calling. I've been listening to you for about a year now, but I just want to make a quick comment on just the general way that Trump has changed a lot of niche cultures throughout America. I guess I work in the comic book industry, and recently, within the last year, there's been a thing called Comicsgate that kind of popped up, and it's not necessarily like a. There was no like kind of controversy behind it originally. It just kind of, they came up with the name Gate because they saw like alt-right kind of people already accepting that as like a good thing. So these people came up with the idea of Comicsgate, but it's basically like an alt-right comic. They're considering themselves like a oppressed minority now, and it's kind of related to somewhat adjacent to alt-right and alt-light and kind of like Gamergate. It's
why are these alt-right comics like illustrators or writers or just like readers? Like there's
both mainly, but it comes out of like, you know, there's a liberal agenda in comics now, and we want to take down the SJWs. Because comics in general, the past 10 years, as far as like mainstream comics, have been trying to appeal to a more diverse crowd.
Right.
You know, they made like a black Spider-Man and a young woman Iron Man, and you know, a Muslim superhero is now Captain Marvel. So they're like fighting the idea of SJWs. But this has only happened within like the last year, and because you could see like a direct correlation from Trump taking office and like, you know, these types of people being more ballsy and vocal and.
Yes, feeling
just
more
getting
aggrieved.
Out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he gives voice for the aggrieved, white nationalist, essentially.
Yeah, and it's if you guys ever like look up the hashtag Comicsgate, there's a guy named Ethan Van Sciver who's actually Jordan Peterson's go-to artist So it's like all kind of related in that same kind of internet realm. But this guy made like he's like one of the leaders of Comicsgate, and there's like this other guy that ended up getting like national press. This guy he made like a troll YouTube name. It's called Comics and Diversity, but it's like against comics and diversity, and he just like says despicable racist things. But he was on like Comedy Central where they pulled him out, and they had a comedian like call him a racist to his face, which is a pretty funny clip to look up.
Weird stuff. But yeah, these subcultures, I've learned my lesson about ignoring them. They don't go away. Pat, how did you come to listen to the show?
Actually, last year I kind of followed the alt-right goings-on and Mike Cernovich when he got you fired for like a day. I was like, who's this guy? And then I've just been listening daily almost since.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike Cernovich. I appreciate it. And thanks for joining us, Pat.
Weird Mike.
There you go.
All right. Thanks.
Best PR you ever had.
Who's laughing now, Sammy? Honestly. If I had Mike Cernovich as my agent when I was in show business, I wouldn't. None of this would even exist.
Production
I would be.
I'm green-lighting.
Who's laughing now, Sam?
I'm green-lighting the film.
Nice.
Matt's got it set up in a totally anachronistic way. I would change it, but I found it.
Ooh.
Mike Sturmett, Sturmich.com.
Let's listen to this liar again. Apparently at the Bernie Sanders had a climate
all
summit.
she does is lie.
Here she is, probably going to tell us that we get some problem with it. Here is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about her climate change plan. She is in a fight right now to get on the Ways and Means Committee. And I think I tweeted this out. There are three, according to Ryan Grimm at the Intercept, there are three congresspeople who are, I don't know if they have specifically all the control, but they appear to. Three steering committee members who will recommend to Nancy Pelosi whether Ocasio gets this spot on the Ways and Means Committee. This is one of the, you recall the interview we had with David Dayen. There are four committees, aside from intelligence, that are hugely important. Every piece of legislation that you care about needs to go through one of these four committees. Ways and Means is a huge one. They do all the tax policy. And she is going toe-to-toe with North Shore. This is North Shore, Long Island, Representative Tom Suozzi. He is a new Dem who would get all his financing and funding from bankers. So listen up, Colton. There's a reason why AOC is popular. It's because she is going up against these forces, basically saying, like, I'm never going to get this money. I'm never going to take this money. I'm never going to get this money. I am willing to lose some allies and support. And she is not getting on the Ways and Means Committee, I can assure you, to protect the banks and to protect wealthy people from having their taxes increased. So the three people who are responsible for this, Representative Barbara Lee, Representative Eric Swalwell.
2020 candidate.
Oh, yeah, really? Possible 2020? And Rosa DeLauro, who is a congresswoman from Connecticut. So if you are from one of those districts, or even if you're not, email them, tell them AOC on Ways and Means Committee. It's important. Here she is at the National Town Hall that Bernie Sanders put together. I see Bill McKibben there, Van Jones, and who's the woman between?
I don't know who she is.
And AOC. Let's hear what they have to say.
But the only way we are going to get out of this situation is by choosing to be courageous. That's the only way we're going to get out of this. And first of all, it's just plain wrong. The idea that we're going to somehow lose economic activity, as a matter of fact, it's not just possible that we will create jobs and economic activity by transitioning to renewable energy, but it's inevitable that we are going to create jobs. It's inevitable that we're going to create industry, and it's inevitable that we can use the transition to 100% renewable energy as the vehicle to truly deliver and establish economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. That is our proposal, and that is what we are here to do. But the only...
There you have it.
So it's just the sort of deluge of dishonesty.
I mean, there she is. I mean, just extolling the both the moral and the moral imperative, and the fact that there will be economic benefits from this as well.
At the risk of killing the fun, I did ask a question about this Green New Deal idea at a talk on the extractive industries at the Socialism Conference. And this guy whose name currently escapes me, but he wrote a book on this stuff, he's very well researched, said that, yes, certainly in the short term, a Green New Deal is way better than what we have now. But long term, the amount of economic activity that would generate within the capitalist system would basically cancel out any net benefit to the environment.
There's definitely a reason to be skeptical of the idea of it being an economic stimulus. I mean, this was, frankly, it was an idea that was first developed, and obviously the policy sets were different, by Thomas Friedman. He's the one who coined the Green New Deal. So there is a reason to be skeptical, but it also, look, the bottom line is whether you accept that assessment or not, that is definitely out there, and I think it's to some degree is sound. By changing the focus of our economy to alternative sources of energy, you are essentially eliminating an extremely oversizedly powerful political force in our economy, in our society, that is inhibiting our ability to move forward with what needs to happen in terms of saving the planet. And that's really, it's a bit of a bank shot, but there is no direct line through that unless you've got like a tank, and we don't have the tanks.
Not yet.
Thinking of Bernie Bro, of like alt-right Bernie. She just sits up here and lies, and she doesn't look like any of us. She doesn't look like other people. Beto inspires you like Reagan.
All right, we got time for one more call.
It takes
Callers,
optimism.
I'm sorry.
Lie.
We've got multiple people who have been on a hold for well over an hour. You calling from a 602 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Armand from Vietnam.
Armand from Vietnam. What's happening, Armand?
Hey, man. I wanted to talk about, I'm a half Turkish, half American citizen, and I've seen like a sort of wave from, I'm 24 years old, I've seen like a sort of wave from and religious and like uneducated sort of, and I guess maybe it's unfair to tie religion as the cause into it, but it just feels like coming from Turkey where, we were such a modern Islamic state to slowly pushing back like that sort of progressiveness that we had for, well over 60, 70 years.
Right.
Or not really 60, 70 years, but, and then following suit, this sort of rise of nationalism in the West, I kind of want to ask, after this is all over, if the elections go well, how do we sort of encourage these people to, because I feel like education has become a sort of, enemy to these people, or education is seen as a shortcoming, or, education is a bad thing. how do we sort of like encourage these people who are so far and you know, radicalized sort of, but not really, maybe that's the wrong term to use, but sort of encourage them to like come back? Is ending these insane talk shows like, you know, what's his name, Bill O'Reilly and InfoWars, is ending those sort of programs enough? And then they'll just naturally, you know, see the world through a different lens, or
it doesn't hurt. But I mean, I think what has to happen is that there has to be, I think, there has to be policies that are implemented that provide material benefit to people, sort of watershed policies that become the new third rails, right? I mean, Social Security and Medicare in this country have not only functioned as providing material benefit for hundreds of millions of people. I mean, you know, through time. I don't want to lie. I want to be, you know, somewhat precise, but keeping 2/3 of our elderly out of poverty. This material benefit has also functioned to provide just almost an immovable, we used to refer to it as the third rail of politics. We don't even talk about it anymore because it's so clearly is. Like an immovable backstop in our politics. And so I suspect that if there is the introduction of other major policy initiatives, let's say like single payer, that it creates even more leverage and gives more of an opportunity to empower the type of politics we like. And hopefully those people will smarten up about also educating the population as to their new relationship with government and create a wider understanding of the possibilities. That's the only thing I can tell you. That's my optimistic view. I'm not going to tell you the pessimistic one. You're too young.
And then another view, something I've kind of seen, you know, throughout many countries is as you reach like, you know, the more rural towns where there's, you know, not as many people and, you know, sort of just either indigenous people or people who have just lived there and it's all their own sort of town. And then coming into big cities where, you know, there's just such a melting pot of people. You know, one usually leans farther right and one usually leans farther left, regardless of really which country you're in.
Right.
How do we encourage, is it just maybe economic development or for these smaller towns, or is there a way to sort of, you know, bring, you know, people to these towns that, you know, maybe have different stories, and would that help like,
I think like, look, this has always been, this has been the dynamic at least for a couple hundred years, I think. And, you know, at least. And I think it's getting a little bit better. I think things like the internet and TV on some level help. I mean, certainly you can see it in the context of things like it's most obvious to me in things like, at least in this country, like marriage equality. Like, you know, just people are exposed. There's no substitute to actually having a daily or, you know, sort of interaction with people who are different than you. But I think communication does that. And I think, like, again, you know, programs like a single payer, if people share a certain relationship to their government, I think it strengthens those things and breaks down those barriers. But I appreciate the call, Armand. Got to jump.
There are some advantages to organizing in red states. I don't know if you're a progressive or a socialist or what kind of leftist you are, but there have been some Democratic challengers who won primaries in red states against more conservative Democrats much more easily than in places like New York, where the Democratic Party establishment is much more firmly entrenched. So there certainly are possibilities to organize both in the electoral sphere and out of it.
He's in Vietnam.
That's a red state.
Red areas.
Super red.
See? Like that?
All right. Sorry, folks. That's all the time we have for
communist
calls.
humor right there.
Oh, geez. I gotta go. I gotta record some stuff. All right. We'll do 5 of these. Sam, Tinder's profile. Hey, girl, swipe right to go left. It's best. Well, that's pretty good. Glass Seagull. Mike Racine was hilarious on the show. Everyone check it out. Germo 2. Great question, Michael. AOC, what's not to like? Home run. 2001, Rumsfeld says 2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon. Interesting.
She gets a decimal off of that shit.
Jeremo, please save Jamie's not yet. Responding to we have tanks on 1250. So sweet. Secret identity politics. This guy's a friggin' nerd. We all know Quran allows us to lie to non-believers. AOC all the way. More Reagan lies. That woman had 62 photo IDs, not 60. Also, she drove a Buick LeSabre, not a Cadillac. Ryan in L.A. Reagan said the thing about trees when he was governor of California. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I thought it was James Watt.
Yeah.
Wasn't he? James Watt was pretty terrifying, too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the anti-AOC caller is Steny Hoyer. Turnip Bega. Last report I saw, 14,000 kids are being imprisoned without their parents. It's terrible to think about it, but is it really possible that none of these kids have died in custody yet? It's hard for me to imagine that's not the case or won't be soon. Are reporters working hard to uncover info like this? I think ProPublica has been doing a lot of reporting on that, but I think it's a good point. And the final IM of the day. Scott Walker, Texas Ranger. Can you guys shed a little light on the effery going on in Wisconsin right now before Evers takes office? We talked about it a little bit yesterday with Ari Berman. We will update you later in the week, probably on Friday. Folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive,